Okay, I'd like to welcome back everybody for presentation number 4. We've resolved our technical issues. And so team 23 from Durham College may begin.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Mahesh. I warmly welcome everyone to the second phase of the Higher Educational Analytics Data Competition 2021. We are here to do our presentation based on the topic COVID pandemic impact on housing affordability. My team members are myself, Leah, Nicola, and Bo. Background. In March 2020, Canada entered various lockdowns due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The different reasons have had a significant impact on the economy and the housing market. In this analysis, we are going to explore how the pandemic has impacted a particular demographic and made them more vulnerable to the housing affordability crisis. We will also provide recommendations to support this vulnerable community as Canada pushes for an economic recovery. The ask. Throughout this whole presentation, we are going to see who has been most impacted by the effects of the COVID-19 on the housing affordability crisis. This is the quote from the United Nations, which has stated that the impact of COVID-19 on women's lives will be affected disproportionately and differently from men.
Crisis, a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. The housing affordability crisis is a time of intense difficulty in finding and keeping a home within one's income level. Affordability problems have increased consistently over the last 2 decades, and those with low incomes are the ones most at risk because income levels are not increasing at the same pace as the cost of housing. The impacts of these dangers include poor health, mental and physical, evictions, generational poverty. So when you grow up in poverty, as you become an adult, you also remain in poverty, and unemployment, among other things. Unfortunately, women are most at risk for low income, and these risks have been exaggerated as a result of the pandemic. Just a little statistic is that 45% of tenant households live within one financial emergency of losing their homes. Evictions are disproportionately burden those with low incomes. The United Nations has said across the globe, women earn less, save less, hold less secure jobs, have less access to social protections, and the majority of them are single parent households. So why are women at risk? The gender pay gap. So when a woman loses her job and collects EI, it's a portion of her income. So if she's already making a lower income, her ability to continue paying her bills on that EI payment is less than, her male counterpart. Also, because she is making less in general, there's less disposable income. The types of jobs women hold, a lot of them are retail, service, waiters, the hotel industry, entertainment, and frontline workers. So there's a lot of nurses and care providers. So they're at high risk of getting COVID. The issue of school and daycare closures. When the pandemic first hit, the schools were closed for quite a bit, leaving women. So it caused women to leave the workforce in order to care for their kids. Typically, it's the woman that has to do that, and women also tend to care for their aging, vulnerable parents. Single parents, we also know that there's a lot of single parents, and they tend to be women, so they have a harder time, because they're one income and they're feeding multiple children sometimes. Domestic violence is also a risky endeavor caused by the pandemic. There's been increased domestic violence, and these women need to leave their homes and find safe shelter. Finally, government policies such as Bill 184 are helping, some help and some don't help with evictions. So this chart here is Angus Reid survey. And what they found was that even though Statistics Canada says that 7% of women in Canada live below the poverty line, what they found was that your experience of poverty, so when you can't afford to go to the dentist, you can't afford to pick up groceries, you're borrowing money from your friends or your family to pay for groceries, you can't pay your utility bill, those experiences actually affect your experience of poverty. And what they found was that the people that were most at risk, the lowest margin of this survey group, 60% of that group was women. So the labor market, another risk to women are the marginalized women and racialized women. So before the pandemic hit, 25% of the workforce was employed. Female workers were immigrants. After the pandemic, 45% of them lost their jobs. The job losses were primarily in migrant women. Women are also more likely than men to stay home and take care of their families, thereby reducing the amount of hours they can work or leaving the workforce altogether, whether it's permanent or temporarily. Women's domestic responsibilities also make it harder for them to advance in their career, to put in that time that it takes to, really make a difference at work, because they are, their time is split between work and home. And women also tend to work in precarious work scenarios. So jobs that are unstable, they're part-time, it's unpredictable, they don't know when they're going to get a shift, they don't get paid for sick days, they don't get any benefits, they don't get a pension, and 60% of women work in these jobs. Gender equality, women earn 87 cents for every dollar that a man earns. If you look at the chart, women are more likely to be earning minimum wage than a male. And this is widened, it's made worse for women who are Indigenous, Black, racialized, newcomers, or living with a disability. There's also a risk to frontline workers. Because many women work in the front lines, such as nurses, caregivers, cleaning, other essentials, they have a high risk of contracting the COVID virus and missing days of work without pay.
I will talk about family responsibilities from my own experience. I'm a mom of 3 years old. I had to quit my job to stay home to take care of my son during the pandemic. We are lucky that we can live on my husband's income, but then I can imagine how hard it will be for them. It will be for the single parents during the COVID. Canada is lack of affordable childcare and lack of workplace supports, such as offering flexible working schedules and caregiver leave. So the women were forced into some jobs with less earning. So a majority of the shelter workers are women, and research has shown that they have been hardest hit by the global pandemic. in terms of balancing paid work and family responsibilities. 75% of part-time workers in Canada are women, and their reason for working part-time is to care for their children. So when 80% of one-parent families are headed by women. So one-parent families have been on the rise since 1950s, but the kids usually live with the mom. Single-income household with children struggle with housing affordability. Nicola?
Looks like she's reconnected again. If somebody else has the presentation, perhaps you can share that and continue on. Does another team member have the poster presentation that you can share?
Give us a minute. Like I'm on a tablet, so I can't share my screen.
Welcome back, Nicola. Are you there?
Okay, I will continue. For the housing, because one parent household have limited financial resources, their ability to enter the real estate market is difficult. Only 7% of first-time home buyers are lone parents. Landlords are also taking advantage of renovation in order to get high rent from new tenants. Domestic violence. Assaulted Women's Helpline received 51,000 calls in 2020 compared to 24,000 in 2019. So as a result of COVID, there was an increase in physical attack, false confinement, sexual violence, emotion and financial abuse, increased human trafficking, and an overall high frequency of abuse in all forms. Women live with abuse or violence may stay because there is a good chance that living will plunge themselves and their children into poverty.
Okay, now let's look at the other impacts for women. Firstly, it's about technology. So no income households have limited access to technology, which limits their access to resources, their ability to work from home, and a limited time on a computer if they have to share with their children who are distance learning. Another challenge for them is food insecurity. We can see from this chart, the women just visit the food bags 2 times more than males. This chart is based on the data resources from the food bank in Durham. So average age of the women visiting food banks is 45. So our team want to make some recommendation for the problem the women faced during or after the pandemic. So firstly, we want to recommend we need to target women and girls in all efforts to address the social economic impact of COVID-19. Then we need to build more the affordable care because they are essential for women to be able to participate in the labor force. Then we need to improve the access to support the services for women, such as we build some more shelters for them. And we also need to increase the social housing supply. And at the same time, we need to educate women and girls, especially in the STEM education, that will give them a more opportunity to get higher payment for the future job. We also need to restrict the growth of predatory paid lenders. We also want to ensure the women's equal representation in all COVID-19 response planning and decision making. Finally, it will be important to apply an intentionally gender lens to the design of the fiscal stimulus packages and the social assistance programs to achieve greater equality, opportunities, and the social protection. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I would now like to open up the floor to questions from the judges.
So, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you should.
So thanks for the presentation. It was great. I think one thing it was missing for me in the presentation to understand where the women are from the SERB perspective, how much SERB they're getting, what does that look like, what is the financial impact. I understand, I was able to understand the reasons behind it, but I couldn't see the analytics or the data behind it. So in the work you've done, what are some of the data that you found that supported your recommendations? Anyone can answer the question.
And Nicola, if you're answering, you are muted, just an FYI.
Okay. What was I going to say? So we actually have access to a food bank database, and it shows all the different sources of income. And what we actually found, but it wasn't part of the narrative, so we didn't really include it, was there were a lot of ODSB and Ontario Works sources of income for a lot of these people, which leads me to believe that, you know, a lot of them are on disability. They are one of the marginalized groups, but we didn't really focus on that for this presentation.
Okay, thanks.
Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the social housing recommendation, and had you given consideration to some possible interventions that could produce results quicker than social housing? So that might take some time.
Does anyone else want to take that? So I know, again, with the domestic violence, because a lot of those shelters, because of the pandemic, they had to social distance, so they didn't have enough beds. They had to have isolation units. So the hotels, again, because the tourism industry is almost non-existent right now, and immediate while the pandemic is still happening is hotel rooms. Long term, maybe we can do something like a temporary hotel. The downside to the hotel is that the resources, just like Kelly said yesterday, when you spread everybody out, then the access to those resources aren't right there. But it is a temporary measure until those houses can be built.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds like a good solution when you're talking about people who you're trying to address homelessness. I guess I'm just thinking that one of the other tools that's increasingly being recommended are rent supplements, and it's really just saying like people have there are a lot of people who are in perfectly good housing and adequate housing. It's just that they can no longer afford it. And so that was kind of where I was going, to see if you considered something like that.
No, I didn't. That's a good idea.
Okay, thanks.
Kelly, do you have anything to add?
I was just curious of you're looking basically at like an already marginalized population, especially when you start digging into things like lower income women and single parent households. Before there's a lot of this is from before the pandemic. So what do you think then are going to be the long-term impacts? Like, what are some of the outcomes you imagine seeing because of how the pandemic has impacted women, like either in housing or in employment or anything? Like, what sort of long-term consequences do you guys anticipate seeing?
I just want to add to this question. I think there's a lot of women, like especially even like I knew like some of a friend of my coworkers. Like I think a lot of women like during the pandemic, they suffer a lot of stress from the family and from taking care of the kids and from the housework and all the stress, financial stress. I think there will be like a mental, I'm not sure, mental issues had to be taken care of like after the pandemic. I think a lot of people suffer depression.
Yeah. I also think like the CERB did help for a little bit, but when that's gone, then what? They're going back to their old ways. And if they already were on the margins, and if they're one of the very low that are facing evictions, like Leah said, there's mental health issues with evictions. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I don't think they'll be able to recover quickly. When landlords are able to, go after you a year later because of new policies, I don't see an immediate fix. I think definitely the government's going to have to step in and make some better policies and help the people.
Okay, do any of the judges have any other questions? All right. Well, that concludes the presentations for this phase 2. I'd like to thank you once again, Team 2023 from Durham College, on your presentation. It was very informative. We are now at the point where we've wrapped up all of our presentations. So now the judges will be deliberating at approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be uploading a pre-recorded video with the results of our scoring, and that will be the announcement, and it will be available online through the feed loop. And we'll also post the results on our competition, the head competition website, found at datacompetition.mohawkcollege.ca. Thanks everybody for watching, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye now.